Good morning. The committee will come to order for the hearing on transitioning the Environmental Measurements Laboratory to the Department of Homeland Security. We learned from Hurricane Katrina that we were woefully unprepared for an entirely foreseeable natural disaster. The failures of our response exposed the sorry state of our emergency preparedness. Many of us wondered what else was suffering from similar neglect that we might only learn of if something goes horribly wrong. Today, the subcommittee is going to review the management of the Environmental Measurements Lab by the Department of Homeland Security's Science and Technology Directorate. It appears that we have stunningly neglected our obvious national security and homeland security need to detect and measure radiation, hindering our ability to respond to nuclear proliferation around the world, and here in the United States to prevent or respond to the detonation of a dirty bomb, a punch that terrorist groups have telegraphed for years. And while we are spending billions to develop the technology to intercept a missile in the air, to hit a bullet with a bullet, a task that many think is a fool's errand, we have shortchanged research to develop the technology to prevent a nuclear device from being smuggled into the United States and detonated in an American city, a far more likely event. EML has specialized in radiation detection and analysis for 60 years. It traces its roots to the Manhattan Project. It should have been a welcome asset and a natural fit for an agency chartered with protecting our country from radiological threats. Instead, detailed plans to close the lab were concealed from both the EML staff and Congress. Critical national security programs at the lab were terminated, and the lab's employees have been left to wonder their future for the past 4 years without any clear direction or decisions from the Department of Homeland Security. When the Environmental Measurements Laboratory was transferred to Homeland Security from the Department of Energy in 2003, Congress expected the laboratory would add value. Beginning with the work on the Manhattan Project, EML scientists developed a world-renowned expertise in low-level radiation measurement, a skill that would have been of critical value, to both help prevent and respond to potential radiological or nuclear terrorist attack. Instead of exploiting and expanding unique skills and capabilities of a laboratory in a strategic location in Manhattan, Homeland Security's S&T, Science and Technology Directorate, soon proceeded to reject the lab's proposals for future work and terminated its existing programs. S&T managers downplayed, dismissed, disparaged the capabilities of the lab, arguing that it had no real unique skills, had low credibility in the view of local first responders, and could not compete with other larger national laboratories. Our first panel today is composed of local, state, and federal officials and a former DHS manager. They will provide a contrary view to that assessment. We will also examine some of EML's key programs that were terminated. One of those was the lab's worldwide radiation monitoring program. Beginning in 1963, EML had built a global network of low-level radiation sensors that were used by scientists to validate global atmospheric transport models. But the system also played a key role in nuclear nonproliferation efforts, rapidly identifying any new sources of radiological activities from nuclear weapons tests. The lab had installed 2 radiation monitors in China in 2002 and had plans to install a new detector in China near the North Korean border in early 2006. But on October 1, 2005, the program was terminated by DHS. Almost a year later, on October 9, 2006, North Korea carried out a nuclear weapons test. It is hard to know how valuable the EML global monitoring program, and particularly its new radiation sensor, would have been in helping determine the sophistication of the North Korean nuclear test. We only know that because of DHS's action, the sensor was not in place and remains unassembled at EML today. In 2005, DHS also stripped EML of its radioisotope chemical analysis labs, critical for the continuation of its radiochemistry quality assistance program. That's pronounced QAP, which sounds like Elmer Fudd using a mild profanity. QAP. It is praised by both state and federal participants as directly contributing to Homeland Security efforts. This program helped ensure that the results produced by radiochemistry labs whose task is to analyze radioactive samples, whether from a nuclear facility or in response to a radiological attack, are accurate. Some projects EML initiated with local first responders in New York City, including a network of rooftop radiation sensors, were halted by DHS. Other programs were started, stopped, and then transferred. The way the EML has fared since being transferred to DHS shows an appalling lack of leadership at the S&T Directorate. The lack of clear decisions and direction regarding EML permitted a haphazard approach and its programs to fester within the S&T Directorate. And as a result, the lab's programs were decimated and its staff demoralized, and a seemingly reckless disregard for how the lab's skills and projects could have benefited DHS, other federal agencies, or the nation. Top S&T managers responsible for terminating some of the lab's key programs had no idea what those programs actually did, and had no discussions about how they might benefit DHS. In addition, S&T managers squandered an inordinate amount of time and effort planning for the demise of the EML laboratory rather than attempting to determine how the lab might be effectively used and its staff successfully employed to contribute to DHS. Because of all of these actions, the lab has been left in limbo. Many of its programs have been terminated, new projects halted, the skills and capabilities of its employees disparaged, and its staff reduced by a third. The subcommittee hopes that EML and the leadership of S&T Directorate have turned the corner, and we can now expect some positive change in the future. Our last panel today will look at the lab's future role in DHS. The vast majority of those actions did not occur under Undersecretary of Science and Technology, Admiral Cohen. Under his watch, the subcommittee is pleased that the new leadership of the S&T Directorate appears willing to utilize a lab that many have referred to as a national asset. Again, we appreciate the S&T Directorate and the Domestic Nuclear Detection Office will work together to employ fully the skills of the staff at the Environmental Measurements Laboratory. And now I would like to recognize the ranking member, Mr. McCall, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Miller. As I said, it's your lucky day. I'm filling in for Mr. Sensenbrenner today. I want to welcome our witnesses and those out there. I want to thank the Chairman for holding this hearing on the Department of Homeland Security's Environmental Measurements Laboratory. As a ranking member on the Homeland Security Committee's Subcommittee on Emerging Threats, Cybersecurity, and Science and Technology, I'm particularly interested in the future of the Department's national labs. To that end, I hope the witnesses before us today can help us understand what EML's capabilities are and how they can best fit into DHS. Anytime a facility is transferred from one agency to another, there's understandably a realignment of work in order to serve the agency's and the nation's best interest. EML is no exception. They will have to adapt to their new Homeland Security mission, which will likely mean a different focus and direction for the lab. In identifying this new path, we should also be mindful of other work EML does that may not be aligned within the DHS structure and mission, and make sure that we don't lose a national capability just because of turf considerations. That being said, I'm confident that there's a safe place for EML in DHS. After all, EML is a unique asset. Located in the heart of downtown Manhattan, they have built up a strong relationship with state and local entities there and are undisputably experts in low-level radiation analysis. Clearly a high priority for DHS. As I said, I look forward to the testimony. I hope this will be a productive hearing, and we will all leave here with a better understanding of how EML can best be utilized in the future. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. McCall. If there are other members, Mr. Rothman is welcome to submit any kind of opening statement for the record, which he has shaken his head to show that he does not.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, let me say I'm very interested in today's hearing, period.
The chairman welcomes similar opening statements from the members of the committee. And we would now like to introduce our panel of witnesses. On the first panel is Mr. Charles McBrearty, the former director of the Materials Technology Air Force Technical Applications Center, Patrick Air Force Base in Florida, Dr. Tony Fainberg, former program manager, Radiological and Nuclear Countermeasures, Office of Research and Development, Science and Technology Directorate, Department of Homeland Security, Lynn Albin, Radiation Health Specialist or Physicist, Office of Radiation Protection, Washington State Department of Health, and Assistant Commissioner Jonathan Duecker with the New York Police Department Counterterrorism Bureau. You can all take your seats. Thank you. Your oral testimony is limited to 5 minutes. All of you have submitted written testimony, which will be placed in the record. Without objection, we may enter various documents in the hearing, whether identified or not at the during the hearing. I assume that is without objection. So after the entire panel has given your 5-minute testimony, the members of the committee will have 5 minutes each to ask questions. I will try to be fairly strict about that, although Ms. McCall has not been an offender in that regard. And we do swear the witnesses. It is our practice to do so. Do any of you have any objections to being sworn in, to taking an oath? You also have the right to be represented by counsel. I know hearing that does not necessarily put you at your ease. There's no reason. None of us anticipate that you need counsel, but you may have counsel if you want it. And none of you have counsel today. Okay, if you would all now please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McBrearty. You may begin.
Is it on now? Okay. I appreciate the opportunity to represent the Air Force Technical Applications Center at this hearing on the transition of EML. A detailed response to the questions you asked me, sir, is in the written testimony that I provided. I'll just give a quick summary of some of those points and be happy to answer and elaborate. The mission of AFTAC is to provide the national authorities quality technical measurements to monitor nuclear treaty compliance by foreign nations and to develop advanced proliferation technologies which are vital to the national security. In terms of this committee's inquiry, AFTAC had maintained an outstanding relationship with the Environmental Measurements Laboratory for almost 4 decades. In 2005, when Dr. Clark of DHS informed AFTAC that DHS would be closing, I traveled to the DHS offices to personally discuss the matter with him. My purpose was to emphasize the importance of the work that EML was doing for AFTAC, as well as my view of the potential value and important value EML represented to the new department. The DHS decision did not change the result of that meeting, so AFTAC proceeded to transfer its nuclear monitoring support functions, which were going on at EML, to Los Alamos National Laboratories, and its engineering and nuclear analysis sampling technology evaluation support functions to Pacific Northwest Laboratories, 2 laboratories which, again, we have had and do have long-term relationships with. The termination of AFTAC's efforts at EML created short-term impact on our programs during the transfer of the analysis work to the other laboratories. Based on the DHS decisions, we adjusted our operations and today are generally comfortable with the new arrangements. Because of this decision or the threat of it, key EML staff scientists have moved on or retired and specialized equipment has been transferred. Thus, the core of the capability of great value to AFTAC no longer currently exists at EML. From my position as a customer of EML and a person experienced with about 38 or so years in this field. I believe that the intangible worth of EML's excellent technical experience and contacts within the international radiation measurements community were not fully appreciated. We did appreciate them and made great use of those contacts in matters like the Comprehensive Deathspan Treaty and things of that nature. However, that said, the ultimate decision whether or not to continue EML's operations was one ultimately DHS had to make. Our operations only funded a small portion of the work that went on there, so we had no choice once the decision was apparently made to terminate, other than to move our stuff onwards. If you have any other questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Ms. McBrearty, remarkably, you had 1:45 left. Dr. Fainberg.
Chairman, Congressman McCall, thank you for members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss my experiences with EML and my views on that lab today. I wish first to state that while I happen to be an adjunct staff member at the Institute for Defense Analyses, my views are entirely personal, no way reflect any positions taken by that organization. I will try quickly to cover several topics requested by committee staff. My background is in training as an experimental physicist, and I recently retired from the government after 20 years service. In 2003, for the first few months after stand-up of DHS, I was responsible for both administrative and programmatic oversight of EML in the DHS Office of Research and Development within the S&T Directorate. Later on, I managed radiation detection and explosive detection research at national labs and at EML. While at DHS, I visited the lab several times to learn about its history and resources. Its work had been mainly in the area of radiochemistry and low-level radiation measurements. There was some mismatch between some of their activities and DHS needs, but I judged that in the field of radiation detection, their experience would be useful for DHS. My initial assessment was that the lab space was in sad condition, rented from GSA at far too high a price. There were 60 staff members, down from over 100 some years earlier. DOE had left the lab as a neglected backwater, perhaps because of DOE's recently declining emphasis on environmental cleanup, which had become the lab's chief area of responsibility. However, although the lab had been in decline, staff welcomed and indeed embraced the chance for a rebirth as part of a mission in which they held a strong and vital interest. Located about a mile north of the World Trade Center, they were strongly and viscerally affected by 9/11 and were extremely motivated to become part of the global anti-terrorism effort. Regarding the staff, some had been employed at tasks that had not changed much for decades and appeared ready for retirement. On the other hand, a large fraction of the technical staff of varied ages impressed me as highly motivated, energetic, and very capable in their areas of expertise. Upon moving to DHS, EML management had transitioned their work to projects that it felt would be useful to and welcomed by DHS. And one example of this activity was a New York area science and tech working group, which held seminars for first responders in the area on radiation and operating radiation detection equipment. I learned later from some participants that these sessions were well attended and appreciated. I found several projects to be of interest. They're written about more in my remarks, but one that particularly struck me was an experiment related to the so-called neutron ship effect carried out by a physicist of national stature, Dr. Paul Goldhagen. This involved measurements of neutrons generated by cosmic rays striking large structures such as ships. It was directly relevant to determining whether it would be useful to try to detect nuclear material in containers bound for the United States on cargo ships. Overall, I would like to make one comment that since upon its creation, the S&T Directorate had willingly accepted EML as part of its new organization, it was clearly incumbent on S&T management to establish that lab's new mission. In fact, one would have thought S&T would have had some idea of how the lab would be useful to them before agreeing to accept them. However, I saw little evidence that serious thought had been given to this matter. Indeed, after a year or two, I heard grumbling in headquarters that EML had no idea of what its mission should be, as though this were not the responsibility of S&T itself. Committee staff have asked me to explain why I resigned from S&T. The matter is not that important, except that the reasons reveal some existence of management issues. And without going into too many details, I had some disagreements with Dr. John Clark, who was supposed to be responsible for facility management over projects at EML. After a series of meetings with him, I suggested that he manage the programs himself, except for those that had already been approved at a higher level by the office director of ORD. He agreed, but shortly thereafter, he came to me and tried to block this neutron ship effect project, for which I had a certain amount of interest and respect. I had asked my management after that I appealed to my management after that for help because they had previously approved that project. And my management chain was entirely deaf to my emails, all of them, except at one point the Deputy Office Director, Robert Hooks, told me that we should fix the matter ourselves. Since they ignored my pleas to reaffirm their earlier commitments on this project, and since I was having a very difficult time keeping other projects there alive and functioning, I submitted my resignation, deciding that management was broken. Management proved later to me, 3 days, that it was broken, because my immediate supervisor, Dr. Gerald Parker, came to me and handed me a letter of counseling, which was a reprimand, for daring to resign. And then he threatened me with sanctions if I continued such bad behavior. This divorcement from reality I thought was noteworthy and complete. Naturally, I left ORD as soon as I could, within about 2 working days, I think it was, and was able, fortunately, to join the DHS Domestic Nuclear Detection Office for my remaining federal service, where I found the working environment quite satisfactory. The SIP project went forward eventually, but it's kind of interesting that I had to be forced to resign to accomplish this. From my perspective, I included then that S&T management was trying to squeeze EML out of existence by turning off or crippling projects one by one, so that it could be finally asserted the lab had no function. I do not know why this was done. Several other projects I thought useful had also been rejected earlier by my superiors. I cannot prove there was an overt intent to close the lab. Indeed, Mr. Hooks assured me at this time that such was not the case. However, in spite of such an assurance, the facts indicated to me that an intention to shut down the lab was the simplest explanation for what was going on. My view is that S&T should have realized it was fortunate in acquiring an asset in New York City, which is a prime terrorist target. The lab had on its own established excellent working relations with city officials and could have functioned as S&T's presence in the area, and these relations could have facilitated communication and cooperation between federal and state and local Homeland Security officials, at least in the radiological arena. This opportunity to take advantage of a ready-made local asset was unfortunately missed by S&T. As to what should have been done with EML, my suggestions would have been to allow it to continue some of the local projects in which it had been engaged. I would have supported continual global monitoring, thinking that in 2004 it was not impossible that it might be useful to have some detectors near North Korea. I would have had it fully engaged in supporting the rest of DHS and local radiological projects. And finally, I would have authorized the hiring of some young scientists with recent degrees to reinvigorate what had been a leading radiation laboratory some 20 to 30 years earlier. Briefly, I would have decided that although the lab had some issues that needed to be fixed, it would have been worthwhile rebuilding it into a high-profile DHS S&T facility in New York. It may be too late for some of these thrusts, but on the whole, the lab still can and should be resuscitated. I'm very glad to learn that finally that this may happen. To save time, I've dropped some other remarks from my oral presentation regarding another S&T lab, the Transportation Security Lab in Atlantic City, with which I have some acquaintance over a decade or two. This lab is the nation's premier source of expertise in explosives detection and in development of detection equipment, particularly regarding aviation security. Practically everything you see in terms of security equipment at U.S. and many foreign airports has been developed at that lab. This lab has suffered from devastating institutional buffeting since 9/11, transferring between agencies twice, having its budget rocket up by factors of 2 and 3 and then drop by factors of 4. I fear we may be in danger of losing this major national asset that helps protect us from terrorist attack. I would be happy to respond to questions about this lab as well as about EML. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Fainberg. Ms. Albin.
Chairman Miller, Congressman McCall, and committee members, thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony on the experience of Washington State in our environmental radiation monitoring efforts following the termination of EML's Quality Assurance Program. I've worked for the Washington State Department of Health for 21 years. I began as a chemist with the responsibility to provide accurate analysis of radioactive contaminants in environmental samples. Presently, I'm a health physicist with the Department of Health, where I use the data to assess public and environmental health risks and to provide oversight of federal and state licensed facilities that could potentially release radioactive contaminants into the environment. I'm also responsible for analyzing radiochemical data to determine its quality and its validity. The Washington State Department of Health has operated an environmental radiation monitoring program since 1961. All of the samples collected by the Department of Health are analyzed by the Public Health Laboratory. This laboratory has capability to analyze for very low levels of naturally occurring radionuclides, fixed fission products, and source materials in any environmental media. Of particular interest to the Department of Homeland Security, the Public Health Lab analyzes the air we breathe, the water we drink, the soil in which we grow our food, the food we eat, and the external radiation levels that surround us. The laboratory uses rapid methods to screen deposition samples to quickly identify contaminants. The data provides the basis of environmental assessments and decisions that are made during radiological emergencies. I can't emphasize enough how important it is that we are confident that the data is both accurate and precise when we make public health decisions. When it was part of the Department of Energy, EML provided performance testing samples for exactly the type of work the public laboratory performs. This program was available at no charge to the Public Health Laboratory and was an important component of quality assurance. The QAP provided a link to the scientists within the Environmental Monitoring Laboratory. Radiochemists who developed many of the classical methods for analyzing radionuclides in the environment worked for EML. These methods were compiled into a manual that is widely regarded as the standard of radiation measurement techniques. As a new radiochemist, I was handed the manual as the basis of understanding radiochemistry. This practice continues today. It wasn't only the EML performance testing samples and the radiochemistry manual that benefited the quality of measurements. It was also that the scientists themselves were easily approached to assist public health laboratory chemists in solving questions regarding radiochemistry. Radiochemistry is part science and part art. The science behind the chemistry allows separation and concentration of specific radionuclides, but there is also an art that requires experience to correctly interpret resulting data. It takes years of experience to be proficient in radiochemistry. The EML assisted the Public Health Laboratory whenever called upon. Performance testing is important for credibility. Performance testing is important for assessment of laboratory capabilities as well as important to the Department of Health's credibility when we use lab data to support decisions. The value of the performance testing comes into play when data or decisions are questioned. From Washington State's point of view, the more performance tests we have to support our data, the better. Two examples of how QAP helped prepare Washington State to respond to an actual emergency are the state's response to fires on the Hanford nuclear site in 2000 and the Department of Homeland Security's Top-Off 2 exercise in 2003. During the Hanford fire, the state mobilized field teams to collect samples. As the fire burned, wind created the concern that soil surface contamination would be blown off-site. The Department of Health analyzed soil, airborne particulates, and charred vegetation samples. Sampling results showed that first responders were not working in radiologically hazardous environment and no off-site public or environmental health impact existed. It's just as critical that decision makers are confident that laboratory has reached appropriate detection limits even in cases where the data reveal no impact. QAP provided an independent evaluation of lab performance that specifically supported the credibility of Washington State protective actions. Performance testing is essential in assuring that if results are questioned, there is a reliable method to verify data. Washington State, since losing the program, participates less often in performance testing programs because of budget considerations. During Top-Off 2, Washington State had to make quick assessments of radiological conditions following a simulated terrorist attack. Although unplanned, samples collected by other agencies, including the EPA and the Federal Radiological Monitoring and Assistance Center, were also brought to the Public Health Laboratory for analysis. The lab's strong quality assurance program gave confidence that the initial assessments were correct, even though samples were not commonly analyzed at the laboratory. It's further provided evidence to other agencies that lab services had documented verification and it was capable of accurately and precisely measuring radioactive contamination in environmental samples. Once again, the data reported by the Public Health Lab was used to support protective action decisions. Confidence in that data was essential. In 2003, the department participated in a performance test sponsored by NIST, designed to test the capability and capacity of laboratories to quickly measure radioactive contaminants in environmental media as well as synthetic urine and feces. One of the findings of the study was an appreciation for the analytical uncertainty in the reported result, which was much higher than for traditional performance tests. This gave rise to questions of how good is good enough for emergency samples, how do we communicate analytical uncertainty to decision makers, and how, in turn, will that uncertainty be factored into protective actions? These are all questions that remain unanswered and could be a starting point for future EML support to states for Homeland Security-related emergencies. As a person who reviews data validity, I must be confident that I'm handing the best information to the decision makers. The welfare of the public, emergency workers, and the environment rely on the quality of laboratory data. These results form the basis for decisions concerning health risk, food embargoes, and population relocation. Performance testing supports data quality assessment by providing an independent evaluation of lab capability. This independent review helps defend data, whether they support recommended protection actions that may impact someone's life or whether they lend confidence to a recommendation of no action. In conclusion, accurate, defensible data improves environmental assessments and enables managers to make better and more cost-efficient decisions. The termination of the QAP affects Washington State because we can't guarantee the level of participation in the private laboratory replacement programs due to costs. Cutting performance programs weakens the defensibility of the data. We're also missing the solid technical support to the public health laboratory provided by the Quality Assurance Program and the scientists at Environmental Measurements Laboratory.
Thank you, Ms. Albin. Assistant Commissioner Duecker.
Good morning, Chairman Miller and members of the committee. My name is Jonathan Duecker. I'm the Assistant Commissioner of Counterterrorism for the New York City Police Department, and previously I was the Director of the Office of Homeland Security of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I'm pleased to be here today, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you about something that is of vital importance to both the city and state of New York as well as the United States. When Police Commissioner Raymond W. Kelly took office in January 2002, the pyre on the grounds of the World Trade Center was still burning. He made his personal mission to ensure that New York City would never fall victim to such an event again. Commissioner Kelly's leadership and vision was the nascence of the NYPD's Counterterrorism Bureau. The mission to make New York City inhospitable to terrorists, to their sympathizers, their supporters, and their facilitators. Fortunately, New York City and the NYPD has thwarted more than one plot against New York since September 11, 2001. One widely supported success was the investigation, the arrests, and the convictions of terrorists planning to blow up the Herald Square subway station 2 weeks before the Republican National Nominating Convention. In addition, the NYPD's robust deterrence and counter-surveillance program has proved its success, confirmed by Khalid Sheikh Mohammed himself, who cited NYPD deployments as the sole reason that an Ohio truck driver, Iman Ferris, presently serving in a prison sentence for his role in the plot to demolish the Brooklyn Bridge, decided that he would in fact not carry out that plot. In New York City, we are combating terrorism aggressively. We acknowledge and welcome the synergy that comes with joining state, regional, and federal partners, all of whom bring resources and expertise to the fight. Over the past few years, our relationship with the Department of Homeland Security has matured. I can say that despite differences that have cropped up from time to time, the level of cooperation we presently enjoy has never been better. It is in this spirit of cooperation and collaboration that I ask you today to ensure that the critical federal resources are neither squandered nor withdrawn from New York City. I'm talking about the yeoman's work taking place at the Environmental Measurements Laboratory located in Manhattan. The EML has distinguished roots dating back to the Manhattan Project. It enjoys a renowned reputation as a subject matter expert in all things nuclear and radiological, from protection to testing to measurement and assessment. Although EML moved organizationally from under the direction of the Atomic Energy Commission to the Department of Energy and then to the Department of Homeland Security, it never left its home in New York City. The NYPD has found EML to be a responsive neighbor and partner. A few years ago, when we determined that we needed to purchase small, portable, but reliable radiation detectors, we asked our federal colleagues to recommend a laboratory capable of testing the products then available on the market. We were told that we would have to travel across the country to the Northwest, where testing would consume a year's time. The EML stepped up and performed the testing for us in a few weeks and made recommendations that work for us to this day. As a result, the NYPD has acquired approximately 700 handheld gamma monitors and 120 gamma neutron detectors to detect potential radiological weapons of mass destruction. They have been deployed throughout the department and are in daily use throughout Manhattan and access points to the city. In addition, advanced gamma detectors and Geiger counters have been assigned to specialized units such as the Emergency Service Unit and the Bomb Squad. The department continues to seek out and acquire new technologies to aid us in the war on terror. In the future, we plan to procure additional nuclear, biological, and chemical detection and monitoring devices. EML has been instrumental in helping us make wise choices from among the available technology and available products. Now, however, the importance of keeping a vibrant EML in New York City is more important than ever. Secretary Chertoff announced last year that the Securing the Cities initiative, STC, would be inaugurated in New York City. Under STC, the Domestic Nuclear Detection Office at DHS has been tasked with developing and implementing the deployment of a system to detect the introduction of nuclear material into our cities for illicit purposes. The EML plays a pivotal role in STC in New York City, providing technical and management roles. The acting director of EML, Dr. Adam Hutter, has served as a key liaison between DHS and the myriad of federal, state, and local partners that comprise the STC partnership. He has served as a mentor to Jumpstart Initiative activities and has been a key advisor on technical details regarding the acquisition, evaluation, and operation of radiological detection equipment, and he has provided critical guidance on the operational exercise activities currently underway in support of these initiative goals. When Director Hutter's guidance and assistance from his laboratory, the STC goals of creating a formidable, in-depth defense of New York City and the region from radiological or nuclear attack would be severely graded. In fact, EML stood next to New York City in our early efforts to establish a defense of the city through the successful Regional Radiological Pilot Project. That program yielded significant research and funding, which led to the fielding of discrete radiological detection equipment currently used to locate and identify radiological source material. Clearly, EML's work in the New York region has been tremendously successful and has provided a substantial capability for federal, state, and local agencies to join in a coordinated defense against the terror threat of the radiological or nuclear attack against New York region. In fact, more assistance from EML would be welcome and would help consolidate the initial success achieved through the program such as securing the cities. The outcome of that program will result in a significant increase in the number of detection equipment deployed by STC partners, equipment which will need precision calibration and support going forward. Also, private industry is rising to the challenge to enhance the sensitivity and capabilities of radiological detection equipment, and we look to EML to provide further guidance on acquisition, evaluation, and operational deployment on technologies yet to be identified. The question is not whether EML has been a success in answering the threat posed by international terrorism. Rather, the question is whether EML stands ready to expand its efforts going forward. The success of STC in New York is important to the entire nation, and we expect it to be a model for implementing similar initiatives throughout the country. I would be delighted to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. And before beginning with the questioning, I mentioned earlier that there would be various documents, but there's a specific set of documents that have been provided to the minority staff. I now ask unanimous consent to enter that set of documents in the record. Thank you. And now the chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes of questions. Ms. McBrearty, beginning with you. I understand that the Air Force has had a long-standing relationship with EML, and the lab has participated in various nuclear non-proliferation related programs. I understand that some of the work, some of the arrangements, some of what EML has done may be classified. Obviously, if we ask a question that would lead you into disclosing classified information, do not answer that. If it is necessary that we know that to understand the answer to the question, we may make other arrangements to get that information from you.
That'd be perfectly fine.
But in this setting, do not obviously do not disclose classified information, and that goes to anyone else who has classified information. Ms. McBrearty, is AFTAC now engaged in any program or project with EML?
We had terminated all the activities that we had with them. So currently, no, we have none going on.
Okay, why is that?
Well, at the time, we had both. Some of the points made here were excellent. We used their quality control and the engineering support to a large extent, and then as advisors to our activities. The major reason is that we had the small project that we did have was approximately $400,000 a year was the level of the work, and the reason we terminated the activities was, as I sort of alluded to and made mention in my written testimony, upon notification that there was an intention to close the laboratory from DHS, it was absolutely necessary that we move these important activities to other laboratories within our United States Atomic Energy Detection System network. We had to make that move upon the notification that the laboratory was to be closed. So while we value it, as I said, very much, what they are capable of and have been able to do, it was necessary for us to move on.
Okay, and again, how did you learn that there was a decision to close EML?
In 2005, in the fall, my project officer got a call from, I think, Dr. Clark or people in the DHS office notifying us that the laboratory was, the DHS had planned to terminate the laboratory, and that it would be necessary for us to move our work elsewhere. Or the other option given to us would be to pick up the tab for it. The DHS did not seem interested in the laboratory or what it had to do for their particular job that they had identified.
Okay, and I understand that the EML that you, the email that you've referred to is one of the documents that we have.
Yes, right. We have the exchange, and it was absolutely essential for us to move quickly. And over the course of the next year, we transitioned the equipment, and a large portion of the sample library, which is a nice national asset in some respects, to our other laboratories.
Right. And Ms. McBrearty, I understand that you were not pleased with that decision to close EML. What did you do about it, if anything?
I personally came up here from Florida. It's always an interesting trip to come from Florida up here, so it was important for me to do so. I came up to talk with the people at the department to explain the importance of the work that we saw going on, albeit small, with regard to EML, but more importantly, to sort of touch on some of the points that were made in here. When, as I said in my written testimony, I was initially extremely pleased to hear DHS had picked EML up, because the DOE had not really had a lot of use for them as the transitions from environmental measurements and things were going on. The focus, as what has been identified, was more toward the larger laboratories. EML has and had in the past large assets that were rather unique in the system. So in seeing DHS pick this little laboratory, but a very competent laboratory up, I was initially extremely pleased. As was mentioned by Mr. Duecker, there has been a plethora of what I call tricorders created for detection of radiation, and the entrepreneurship that's out there on the market to sell these things is huge. Quality control, measurements, validation, and testing of these sorts of things so that you have compatibility and things actually work is critical. And to me, that was a job that EML has shown capability to do in the past. So my initial impression when I heard they were being picked up by DHS was, great, this is a good location. I was disappointed, obviously, when the decision was made, or indications of that decision, from two perspectives. One, we had to do some moving and shuffling of stuff, which was an impact which we have recovered from. But I think, as has been mentioned here, the intangibles are the things that worried me most.
Okay. I have further questions, but in order to set an example for the committee, I will now recognize Mr. McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Fainberg, I'd want to, if you could tell us about EML's infrastructure capabilities and morale prior to its transfer to DHS, and then if you could expand beyond that, whether you think these capabilities fit within the DHS mission.
As to the morale before it transferred, I was not directly aware of it. I didn't have close contact. The morale shortly after transition I can talk about, and people were very happy to be away from DOE and within DHS. Regarding their infrastructure, as I said, their plant, their lab space was fairly depressing and barely functional. However, they did have laboratories that within that lab space that they did keep functioning quite well, supporting the CLAP program, for example. And they had quite a bit of capability in radiation detection technologies. Their development of I think it was called a comprehensive monitoring system, was kind of interesting. This was a set of gamma ray detectors they had assembled from parts on the market, but at much cheaper prices than you could buy assembled detectors on the market. That became the core of their rooftop sensor system. Hooking that all into to a central command room at DHS at EML was quite a useful thing to do as a demonstration for what one might do in the future, putting a radiation monitoring system in a large city. What you have to be careful, you don't want to put a million monitors out there because you'll never be able to manage that, but you could think of putting maybe 50 or 100 monitors in strategic places. And this kind of work was an interesting pilot for that. As I also indicated in my remarks, some of the people there were clearly ready for retirement. However, I identified at least a quarter of the technical staff who I thought were extremely active, up with current technologies and good, and many of them, in fact, were useful to the comprehensive monitoring test bed that was set up by other elements in DHS in New York City. They assisted with that, where they were out on bridges and tunnels and at all hours of the day, taking measurements, testing out systems, and running down alarms. What they could be useful for in the future, all that expertise in radiation detection still is there. I am not sure how many people remain in the radiochemical area. Reconstituting that certainly is possible, but it's not certain to me that the cost-benefit analysis would favor reconstituting laboratories that were there. It would be useful, however, I think, to use those people who are still in the system, who are still the federal employees there, and their expertise in helping other laboratories do quality assurance work. I think that could be done. There's a lot that can be done there, and if S&T wanted to establish a serious technological presence in New York City, nothing would prevent them from hiring a few more people, as I said, younger people, to reinvigorate it. I would also suggest that they are really being ripped off by GSA. That is not a good place to be, and the prices, I understand, are going up for the rental because the prices in Greenwich Village, where this is located, are going up, and GSA is able to match rental to local market values. If it were up to me, I would try to put them in another facility in the New York area, perhaps in Lower Manhattan, owned by other elements of DHS. That probably would be a lot more.
Yeah, thank you for raising that point, and it's a good transition. I was going to ask Mr. Duecker the value of having the DHS science and technology footprint in Manhattan, where you're located, and in response to Dr. Fainberg's comments, but also what role they can play to better assist your counterterrorism efforts in New York.
Yes, sir. When you, in your opening remarks, you commented that this was a critical, for national security purposes, it was a critical resource. We take a very parochial approach to that in that regard, and we look at this as a very critical local resource. They provided us significant test and evaluation capabilities, as I mentioned, looking at the rad pagers that we currently have on the street. And as was mentioned, there's so much technology out there nowadays that making sure that what our cops on the streets carry in terms of detection equipment, in fact, is going to detect something that we should be watching for is of critical importance. There's a lot of technology out there, and frankly, the New York City Police Department we're not the subject matter experts on test and evaluation of this kind of equipment. We rely on our partnership with EML, and having them local to Manhattan and having them basically a partner within the city has become something that we rely on to a great degree. Otherwise, we either have to go further up on eastern Long Island to B&L, which is a laboratory about 65 miles outside the city, or elsewhere outside the region. And in terms of the threat to the city, the rad threat and the nuke threat to the city, that's just not a workable solution for us. So we look at the partnership that we have with EML, Dr. Hutter in particular, as being something that has been good in the past, and we're looking to grow that in terms of the Securing the Cities initiative that we currently have. Ultimately, what we want to do is we want to create a ring of sensor technology around the region to protect New York City, because as we know, New York City is the primary threat set for the threats. So,
in your experience, has a transition from EMS to DHS been a smooth one? Is it a positive experience for you, or what can be done to make it better? to better assist you?
We always ask for more. You know, if the New York City Police Department consistently requests for items, and we get a portion of those, and we're happy with those, but we're always constantly asking for more. I can't really speak to the transition from DOE to DHS in that term, but I can tell you that since about 2004, the relationship that we've had with them has been growing since 2003, and we would like for them to stay in New York City and greatly enhance their capabilities in New York City, so that as we go forward with the RAD detection system that we envision, we have a partner that's right there that we can work with, that's local. I mean, one of the things that we rely on in New York City is that we don't have to rely on folks in Washington, D.C. or outside the region. We'd like to interact with them right there in the city.
Thank you. I see my time has expired.
Thank you. There should be ample time for all of us to have a second or even third round of questions. Mr. Rothman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me thank you for holding these hearings this morning. Let me just start by saying, not surprisingly, as a representative from the northern part of New Jersey, across the George Washington Bridge from Manhattan, representing that district, I am a firm believer that the number one target of terrorists, New York City and the New York metropolitan area, should be given the commensurate amount of the Homeland Security funding and counterterrorism funding, because it's justified on the basis of risk. In addition, because of the quality work of the New York Police Department and the other law enforcement and first responders in New Jersey and New York, we have come up with great approaches to the threats and have invented the wheel, so to speak, and so other targets around the nation can come to us, as they often do, as the model for programs, and it is a more efficient use of the nation's national security or Homeland Security funding. So the burden of proof, in my mind, should be on any agency or individual who would withhold funds or close Homeland Security projects in New York City or New York metropolitan area to prove why that's a good thing or necessary. Here's my general question to any of the panel members or all of you who want to answer. I look forward to hearing from Dr. Clark, and I've read his testimony. Is the closing or the decision to close EML, was that simply a good faith decision that people can disagree with, but nonetheless, was it a good faith effort on their part to best manage the taxpayers' funds, yet accomplish its mission, or did it evidence some bias or poor judgment or pattern of bad management decisions that you would like to comment
on? Congressman, sympathetic to where you come from. I grew up in Hackensack. My parents are still there.
My constituents.
That's a coincidence. I had no idea of this beforehand.
Okay.
I was told, as I said in my testimony, that there had been in May of 2005 no plan to close the laboratory, and in fact there had been talk of establishing sort of in its place or transitioning it into something called a technical liaison office, which I never understood and didn't make any sense to me, but maybe you can hear about that from later witnesses. It appeared to me that there was a decision to close it down, and I do not know why. I don't know what caused it, if there were bad feelings that had been generated by earlier miscommunications between laboratory management and headquarters. I don't know if it was just, and I suspect this is what it is, the difficulties of starting a new organization, S&T, within another new organization, DHS, and assimilating pieces and laboratories from elsewhere, and the confusion that reigned at that point. It may well have been a good faith effort. I wouldn't question that. I do think it was a very poor judgment, and that's all I can say.
Any other panel members wish to comment?
Yes, sir. I guess I would throw a little into this, too. Was there a decision to close? Yes, we had the impression there was a decision to close the place. Was there bias? Of your two parts of your question, bias, I don't know that that was the case. I simply feel that there was a lack of appreciation of the intangible values that were embedded in this small laboratory located in New York City. Two, it was very costly. You've heard indications of the costs of doing business in the city, and I guess that comes with the territory. But it was viewed as a costly operation vis-a-vis the new organization, and I don't think the new organization appreciated that it could utilize those, that it had those talents.
But you don't see a bias or an underappreciation of the threat that New York City and its surrounding areas were under, vis-a-vis the cornfields of Iowa or the sheep farms in Montana, who were getting a disproportionate share of DHS money?
Well, sir, I don't know how the distributions go, but I will say this. As I said earlier, I thought it was good that they'd been picked up by DHS because they were in the location that needed some help. There's an analog to the DHS New York City thing in the Argonne National Laboratory located in Chicago. The synergy that has derived by the presence and working closely with first responders, defense, the Homeland Security kind of initiatives that Chicago's developed has made great use of Argonne. And to me, that model was one I thought was going to prevail in the EML relationship.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Rothman. Ms. McBrearty, she described the DHS, the S&T Directorate, not really understanding what they had. The image that comes to my mind is the last scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where the Ark of the Covenant is in a crate being loaded into a warehouse on top of other crates by a forklift. I have the sense that they didn't quite comprehend what they had from what you said, and that's your impression as well. You said you came to Washington to discuss the value of the labs. Did you give a classified briefing to Mr. Clark or anyone else?
No, sir. At the time, during that visit, the venue was not available for a classified briefing. However, the importance of EML to us in the unclassified venue, their relationships with the international community, our associations with them in the comprehensive test ban treaty development of samplers, those sorts of things, those values that we derive from this little entity, those were the sorts of things I imparted. Another particular bias of mine, perhaps, is that I valued the EML, and AFTAC valued EML too. It's a small government laboratory as opposed to a DOE facility. Now, we love the DOE laboratories. We have great associations with them and a lot of work that goes on. But what EML uniquely provided, in my opinion, and it's in my written testimony, is the ability to independently assess technologies and do so in a very capable manner. So, in that regard, that was part of the value or pitch that I thought EML represented to the DHS.
Thank you. We have been called to a vote. We will continue for a while. We all have a very good idea of exactly how long it takes us to get to the floor, and we have 15 minutes, and we should be able to at least complete my round of questions. Did the decision by DHS force you to terminate any of your programs?
Is that directed to me, sir? Yes.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm still.
Well, actually, we had some activities that DHS, through their good offices, assisted us with, which we were not able to carry out. So I have to leave that at that point.
Is that because of the nature of the information? Is it?
Yes, and
okay.
Rather not go into that.
Thank you. And did you, at that point, did you have any plans to transfer or terminate or halt or cancel any of the programs until you got the email telling you that EML was going to be terminated?
No, sir, not at all. Not at all. We and my staff had full impressions that we would continue operations into the future pretty much as we had in the past.
Okay, if EML employees were told that the Air Force was not any longer interested in working with them, that was inaccurate?
Oh, absolutely. We were basically told that we needed to find other places for our work because there was an intention to close the laboratory. We were also told that it was considered private information, and that we respected the fact that the decision had not been made, and we made no contact to any employees per se regarding that.
Okay. One last question. I think we will all go to vote, and then we'll be in recess and come back and complete the hearing. I apologize for the herky-jerky nature of this. It is simply what our schedules are like. But one last question, Mr. McBrearty, and I know that probably you more than any other witness have to tread carefully to avoid disclosing classified information. But I know that you must have been aware of EML's network of global sensors.
Yes, sir, very much so. In fact, we were close with them on that and appreciated the work they did in developing that network because it gave the monitoring community at large a better capability. Okay.
EML had installed 2 radiation sensors in China in 2002, had plans to install a 3rd sensor near the North Korea border in 2005, just before DHS shut down that program. From the technical expertise you have in this area, what would have been the value of the information gained from those sensors?
As part of the expansion of an international network of samplers, and national or international.
I'm sorry, excuse me.
So the value, that's a hard question to answer directly, but always more samplers, more locations, more interplay between these networks, samplers within a network is of value. So from AFTAC's perspective, with its job of worldwide nuclear test monitoring, we have always been interested in the advancements at EML and the associations that they had with these things. To have a sampler closer to Korea, given those things, a joint operation with the Chinese and the U.S. through EML was certainly a valuable undertaking, and we were quite interested in seeing that as a means of improving the ability to globally monitor those things that all the nations who have signed up to this comprehensive test ban treaty have expressed utility in.
I know my time has expired and we need to go vote, but we'll just one last question. I know that there are other sources of information about the detonation of a nuclear device anywhere in the world. Was the information you would have gotten from those sensors duplicative, or would it have been helpful additional information?
It could have been supplemental, sir. AFTAC is the operator of the United States Atomic Energy Detection System. We're the ones who provide that information and did detect and reported on that nuclear test. Those sorts of things, we look at the entire suite of systems available, both U.S., international, and those that EML would have had, and those things could help under certain circumstances. In the North Korean test, they would not have helped because the situation is that samplers that are involved or were involved with the worldwide RAMP or remote monitoring program have to do with monitoring particulate debris as opposed to the gaseous stuff that actually came out of the tunnel. In that particular case, we AFTAC collected the gases using our aircraft. So those samplers per se would not have, in hindsight, been useful in that case. However, if the event that occurred had thrown stuff into the atmosphere, depending on the meteorology, depending on where the sample is transported to, they could have indeed played a part. But that's a scenario that did not occur. However, more is always better.
All right. Thank you. Okay, again, I apologize to all the witnesses, but we do need to stand in recess to allow us to vote, and we'll be back as quickly as we can. Thank you. Thank you. We should have another hour or so before we have to do that again. We are back in, the committee will be back in order. In any moment now, Mr. Rothman will be prepared to ask some questions. Okay. Mr. Rothman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Duecker or Duecker? Decker. Thank you for your service, first of all, and please convey our thanks to all the men and women you serve with on the NYPD, and
Thank you. I appreciate
you
that.
just do a great job, and thank you for your work with New Jersey's finest and bravest and all of our first responders.
We were out with them yesterday on the Securing the Cities initiative. We were with Passaic and Bergen counties. It was the second phase to the Securing the Cities initiative. There's going to be quite a few more phases going forward, but yesterday was a good day for us.
Great. As you know, many people in my district work in Manhattan, and many of our first responders were the ones who came into New York City to help out, as well as doing a lot of the medical care at Liberty State Park. Commissioner Decker, there was apparently a report prepared by the employees of DHS that evaluated EML. I think the report was 2004-2005. That report painted a portrait of the New York City first responder community as being lukewarm in its feelings about EML. Do you recall if that is an accurate statement of the feelings of the New York City first responder community at that time?
I don't know what comprises the first responder community to which you refer. I don't know how broad that was.
Right.
I don't know to what degree the New York City Police Department was involved in that assessment or that survey. I can tell you that with respect to the relationship that we have, and it's evolutionary with EML. It's evolutionary because the technology that we see in terms of RAD and nuke detection devices, that's evolutionary. Our relationship with them has grown. It's grown more in the last year, I think, than it did in the 2 or 3 years previous to that. A lot of that has to do with the leadership of Dr. Hutter, as I mentioned, and his willingness to be a partner in the Securing the Cities initiative, and understanding that instead of having technology drive operations, I think he's willing to allow operations to drive technology, and he's
Commissioner, how long have you been aware of the workings of EML?
I've been with the NYPD for about 1.5 years, so it's been. I was aware of the RAD issues as soon as I got there, and the fact that EML played a pivotal role in the testing of the RAD detection devices that we have in the street.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Fainberg, Dr. Clark's prepared testimony, in it he says that a review of EML found no S&T project manager who intended to fund EML beyond 2006 in any other activity other than the CMTB, Countermeasures Test Bed Project. You were the program manager for Radiological and Nuclear Countermeasures in the DHS S&T Directorate at the time. Did you plan to fund any projects at EML beyond 2006?
I was program manager until, I believe it was late April of 2005.
Right.
At that time, we were not planning anything very much in the fiscal 07 timeframe for EML or for any of the other labs. We were kind of consumed with doing fiscal 05 and 06. My intention had been to propose continuing funding in a number of areas. I had not been asked, at least I do not recall having been asked if I intended to fund them beyond fiscal 06. Had I been asked, I would have said yes, I would have.
In your experience, decades of experience in your field, is it customary for people to ask about projects and their longevity several years beyond the present?
It can be. I mean, some projects by their nature are large, long-term projects.
But your testimony is you just weren't asked.
Yeah, I do not recall having ever been asked what I wanted them to do in 07. In documentation that we were supposed to provide each year for the research plan, there was a list of projects and how long they would last and how long we anticipated they would last. Some of the ones I had down, like the ship effect, were supposed to finish in 06, but there was a possibility it might have continued into 07, for example. Other things that were going on, like the New York area Science and Tech Working Group, were ongoing things which I would have wanted to keep. I wanted to keep the global monitoring, for example. But a number of these projects that I'd wanted to keep, I'd been told at a higher level, not by Dr. Clark, but by other people who had responsibility up the chain, that they were not going to be approved.
If I may, just one other question. The neutron ship project?
Yeah, neutron ship effect, yeah.
That ultimately was worked on by some other group.
Well, no, it's worked on by Dr. Goldhagen even today, I believe in collaboration with RSL, a laboratory at the Nevada test site that also has interest in it. But Dr. Goldhagen, I believe, is still working on that today.
So just forgive me, was he at EML?
Yes.
And then...
as far as I know, he still is.
Oh, he still is?
Yeah.
So that work continued?
That work...
At EML?
That work did continue, yes.
Then I must have misunderstood you. Was there some slowing down or hindrance of that work?
Oh, Dr. Clark wanted to prevent the acquisition of a detector that was vital to do the work properly. After people at the higher level, the office director, had approved it. And it was over this issue that I resigned. I said, it seems to me that you're trying to block something that you don't have competence to do. I went to my management and I said, why are you allowing this? And my management ignored me.
And how long after you resigned did the equipment get approved?
I don't know, probably within a month or two, but I don't know. I was told within a few weeks that it would be or it had been.
But you believe there was a causal relationship between your resignation and the acquisition of this equipment?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I understand Mr. Call has no further questions of this panel. I do have a few more of Ms. Albin. Ms. Albin, I mentioned in my opening remarks that one of the most likely terrorist events, one that has been amply telegraphed, is a dirty bomb. Could you describe what role EML might play in the event of a dirty bomb or any other kind of radioactive event?
So far we've been talking, kind of implying that the events that would be covered, people would be able to carry instrumentation into the area and say whether or not it's safe or not safe, kind of go, no go. And those handheld instruments are good for that, good for looking at first responder safety and good for making a quick call to evacuate an area. But in the case of a dirty bomb, those instruments have limited capabilities, and it really is going to be the radiochemical analysis of samples that are going to give us the information we need to know what is the extent of the contamination if it was a dirty bomb, and are people safe? Can they come back to their houses if they've been evacuated? And for us, we are one of the people in the trenches. We're the people that are doing that analysis, and we're handing our results off to government officials that are going to make decisions. And we need to have the credibility and make sure that we're doing the best we can do. So if we are analyzing samples and we're giving data and we tell people, you know, you need to stay away, that's one problem. But if we're also telling people it's okay to come back, it's safe to come back, there is no hazard here, those no action decisions require that we have a lot of confidence in our data. And that's where the performance testing, like the QAP program, helped us, because it independently verified the work that we do, and independently gave us that assurance that the data that is being produced by the public health laboratory can be used by decision makers to address those problems.
Okay, you mentioned the Quality Assessment Program, QAP, and as I understand it, it set standards for laboratories to verify the reliability of their detection equipment. Can you describe how Washington State's involvement with the QAP or QAP at EML helped your programs?
Well, the QAP program was directly providing our samples that were directly related to the type of work we do, low-level radiochemistry analysis. So that is how we use them with the QAP program. But EML also had other programs. They sponsored an international intercomparison to look at external radiation levels, and there was also another program where they tested the ability for the analyst to correctly look at spectral data. A lot of interaction with EML, aside from the QAP program, as well as availability of the scientists to answer questions, to collaborate on what to do in a situation where we have a problem analysis.
I feel like I'm talking to you about cell phone. You're kind of going in and out.
Oh, sorry. How's that?
Our technology, oddly enough, the Science and Technology Committee does not always have the best technology. And oddly enough, our witnesses are sometimes the worst in Congress in using the technology. I don't know if you've answered this, but now that QAP has closed, what do you do? Who do you go to for what QAP formerly did?
We participate in other performance testing programs, and one of them is through a mixed analyte. It's a program that is sponsored by DOE Lab in Idaho, and it is developed for mixed waste. And they augmented their program to include some of the radionuclides and the work that the QAP program was doing in their performance and distribution schedule. And there is also a private laboratory that has picked up quality assurance for environmental samples. And the difference is that we cannot fully participate in the private laboratories program because of costs, and we're limited by costs. And the government samples, or the samples from EML, were at no charge to us. And the RESOL, or the Idaho laboratory samples, are similar, but they lack some of the natural products and things that were provided by the QAP program.
Okay. Your answer to this question seems evident, but if the QAP program were reconstituted in EML, would you use it again?
We would use it again, yes.
Thank you. I think we are fine now with this panel. Thank you all very much for your testimony. Ms. McCall, I know you need to leave shortly. If we could maybe take a shorter break than we'd ordinarily take, and we could have you ask questions first.
Thank you.
If you could, okay. The next panel is not really a panel. It is Mr. Clark, Dr. Clark. So if we could just take a couple, 3 minutes to stretch and let people reposition ourselves, we could begin with Dr. Clark. Okay, the committee is now reconvened, and Dr. Clark is our next witness. Dr. John F. Clark is the Deputy Director of the Office of National Laboratory Science and Technology Directorate, Department of Homeland Security. As you know, Dr. Clark, your testimony will be limited to 5 minutes, but you have submitted a written statement which has become part of the record. And after you've given the testimony, each of the committee members will have 5 minutes. We may have more than one round, and we will call upon Mr. McCall first to accommodate his schedule. We do swear our witnesses, so Dr. Clark, if you would stand. Do you have any objection to being sworn? Okay. And you also have a right to counsel. Do you? If you could raise your right hand, do you swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Dr. Clark, you may begin.
It really is a pleasure to be
here. Dr. Clark, I think you're not. Yeah.
Okay, well, there we go. Sorry. I was saying that I wanted to thank you for holding this hearing and specifically for inviting me to testify. I think that your oversight is providing a catalyst for key decisions by the leaders of the Department of Homeland Security that I hope will allow the EML staff to develop a more productive role within the department. Now, I've been honored to serve in the Department of Homeland Security since July of 2004. Like many of my colleagues in Homeland Security, I was moved by the events of 9/11, and I interrupted my career to devote time to national security. Now, for me, the motivation was quite personal. I am a New Yorker. 11 people with my family name and 69 of my fellow Fordham University alumni died on that day. And that was basically my motivation for coming to Homeland Security. I was very fortunate to find the Office of Research and Development, and they gave me the opportunity to apply my 37 years of research and management experience to assist in the integration of the DOE national laboratories and the specialized DHS organic laboratories into a laboratory complex that would serve the needs of Homeland Security. Now, you have asked me to testify regarding the termination or transfer of programs, projects, or activities at one of these labs, the EML. You wanted to know how these decisions were made and the impact of these decisions. My written testimony addresses these issues in context, and I apologize for the length, but it is a historical record based on extensive written documentation of everything in that, and it has been entered in the record. Now, the extensive science and technology reviews in which I participated found that the EML had serious challenges, let me put it that way, to overcome with regards to matching their legacy capabilities with the current missions of the Department of Homeland Security. I assure you that to properly address this kind of issue, the transition of a laboratory involves people and their past experience and many, many factors. You have to approach it with frankness and candor in order to make realistic management decisions about the future of the institution. And these judgments and findings are summarized in my testimony for the record. But what I wanted to do is to assure you that throughout the process of investigation, review, which went on for, well over a year, perhaps 18 months, the leaders within the Science and Technology Directorate at that time always acted with great empathy for the people, the individuals at the EML, who, after all, had been caught up in a difficult transition which was not of their making. Nonetheless, the Undersecretary and his predecessors are pursuing an important national mission with limited resources. They have attempted to tackle the difficult challenges associated with the EML forthrightly, honestly, and in my view, courageously, in order to blend the EML capabilities with the national needs served by the Department of Homeland Security. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm prepared to answer questions.
Mr. McCall.
to thank the chairman for accommodating my schedule. Dr. Clark, there's been a lot of say controversy, but in terms of how you handled EML at the transition time, we heard from Mr. McBrearty that in his testimony that you notified AFTAC in December of 2005 that DHS had made the programmatic decision to close EML. And my question is, who actually made that decision?
Well, perhaps could I just clarify
Sure.
Dr. McBrearty's statement? In fact, the AFTAC contacted the Science and Technology Directorate, myself, in an email, which I have. And this email said that they were preparing their FY06 budget and they needed to know what the status of our review was. This was a little difficult because our review was not completed, which I told them that the process of getting a decision through the Department of Homeland Security had not been completed. However, at the programmatic level in the Office of Research and Development, that decision had been made to close the laboratory, not to withdraw from New York, but to close this specific laboratory called EML. Right?
And then who again?
Sorry.
Who made that
to answer
decision?
your question, it was
Yeah.
Dr. McCarthy, who was the director of the office, after many, many briefings. And
Okay. Do you know if this decision ever rose to the level of the undersecretary?
yes, I do.
Or the secretary to sign off on it?
After the final decision was made at the programmatic level, and I emphasize this was not a Homeland Security decision because that has to go through the secretary. But at the programmatic level in the Office of Research Development, I was instructed to prepare a package that would go from the undersecretary to the secretary, and that package contained our plans for, as I say, the closure of the institution called the EML, and simultaneously the stand-up of a new organization that would satisfy the value proposition that we had identified for S&T activities in New York.
And would, again, did this rise to Undersecretary McCreary's level?
Yes, it did. I was present at the briefing.
And did he basically approve this decision?
He agreed that this was the right thing to do, and he was the one who requested that this decision package be prepared.
And again,
through Dr. McCarthy.
Okay, and the decision was to close, or just explain the decision itself.
Okay.
I mean, how is it going to change the role of?
Well, as I've stated in my testimony, there was this process went through three stages. First was the review of what the reality of EML was, which was very staggering. The second review was, well, since the reality of EML, as it stood at that time, was not contributing much. They did contribute some, but they weren't contributing anything commensurate with the cost of maintaining the laboratory, that we'd better do an investigation and find out what would be valuable in Manhattan. Because Dr. McCarthy was very determined that if possible, if we could find a value-added mission, that we would maintain a capability in Manhattan. We did this. We consulted widely across the department with all of the Coast and Border Protection, the FEMA, all of the agencies within Homeland Security to see what they thought they needed in terms of technology support in Manhattan. We consulted with the Office of Emergency Management in New York. We consulted with our agencies both in New York and in Washington. We consulted, my hands too much, I apologize. We consulted widely with everybody that we could think of. And we came up with a value proposition. And the value proposition was basically the types of things that Commissioner Duecker was talking about, supporting the first responders with certain types of technology support, including the countermeasures test beds. That was one of the things that we found that was obviously of benefit. But it only involved, at that time, 4.8 full-time equivalents out of a laboratory which is over 40 people and costing us in excess at the time of, as I recall, $7 million a year. So you see, that was the reason behind all of this. We were trying to find a cost-effective method of supporting the both DHS operations and the first responders in New York.
And so that's the value added that remained in the mission.
Exactly.
And what happened to the other the other core missions?
Well, let's get back to that. The only other core missions that EML had, you've heard the testimony about the QUAP program, the AFTAC program, and you haven't heard about the NNSA program. It was also NNSA in the Department of Energy. That was also supporting this counter-proliferation mission. In the spring, I believe, of 2005, in the preparation for her decision, before she made the decision, Maureen McCarthy asked us to consult with these small programs. They, as you heard from Dr. McBrearty, $400,000 involved basically one full-time staff member to service that program. And the NNSA program was a few sample measurements during the year. It didn't amount to very much. But she was thorough, and she asked us to consult with these agencies to see if we made a decision at that time on EML, what would be the effect on their programs. We didn't want to disrupt the valuable programs of other agencies.
Okay, I see my time's expired. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Clark. Dr. McBrearty is from Greensboro, which is in my district, and he is well regarded in that community. He is regarded as very competent and has a high reputation for integrity. So this is not the questions about these decisions are not personal attacks, but they really do go to the correctness of the decision. Your testimony just seems to be irreconcilable to the testimony of all the other witnesses that we've heard from today, and I think we will hear from in a later panel. I know that others were involved in the decision from your testimony. You heard Mr. McBrearty testify that there was no classified briefing, that he did come to Washington to complain, to protest what was happening to EML, and to explain that it had an important role in AFTAC and other programs by the Air Force, but that there was no classified briefing. Is that correct?
No.
That's not correct.
That's not correct, no.
Okay.
Now, I have no personal knowledge of this in that I did not participate in the briefing, but I was told by Dr. Parker.
Who is Dr. Parker?
Dr. Parker was the head of research and development in the Office of Research and Development. He reported to Dr. McCarthy. He told me that he had a classified conversation with AFTAC. Now, that's all I know about it. I don't know who he might have talked to, whatever, but you know, that was a classified discussion.
And at that point, then you understand that AFTAC conveyed to the Air Force, conveyed to DHS, the nature of its programs that EML contributed to, and that would be disrupted by the closing of EML. Is that right?
No, that is. I just testified that I don't know what the content of that discussion was because it was a classified discussion. I was not involved with it.
I assume you have security clearance. You could be in a classified.
I could have been. Yeah, I was not invited.
Okay. Well, it was our impression. The reason you're sitting there today is that we understood that there was no one at DHS who knew more about EML than you did. Is that wrong?
Well, Mr. Chairman, before I was assigned to this task by my management, I knew EML as just by the name. I had no knowledge of it. But when I was assigned this management review task, I did due diligence, and I talked to people in the Department of Energy who had managed this EML throughout the decades, and so I learned a great deal about EML. So I suppose the statement is true that I knew more about it than anybody else, but it was only because of the reviews that I was conducting for the department.
Okay. Did you know from Mr. McBrearty that there were programs, AFTAC and others, that he regarded as important to national security that would be disrupted by closing EML?
I did not talk to Mr. McBrearty initially. I contacted the AFTAC program manager when, as I said, I was requested by my management to find out the effect of any change in EML on their programs. I talked to a Mr. Scott Smith, and we later exchanged emails. And it was in that conversation that let's back up. The conversation was about a proposed trip of an EML staff member to China. I inquired about whether this trip was in fact requested by AFTAC. In the course of that conversation, I mentioned that we were reviewing the EML and its role in S&P, and then I proceeded to the question that I was asked to ask, which was, in the event that a decision was made to change EML, and at that time, of course, no decision was made, a closure or otherwise, if a decision was made, what effect would it have on your program? Mr. Smith told me at that time that it would have minimal effect. He mentioned, if I recall correctly, 5 other laboratories that could do the work that EML was doing, and that was the end of the conversation.
Which work is this that we're talking about?
We're talking about the AFTAC work, and Mr. Smith was their program manager. Dr. McBrearty was the head of the materials division in AFTAC. This is the man directly in charge of the program. And that occurred in the summer, before the discussions that Dr. McBrearty was talking.
Did either Ms. McBrearty or anybody else discuss with you the national security implications, the importance for monitoring of nuclear proliferation of the sensors in China?
Mm-hmm. I don't believe this. Well, I'm not sure whether that was mentioned specifically. As Dr. McBrearty testified, he did come to see me in Washington. He was actually there, as I understand it, for a meeting at DHS, and he stopped in. And we talked for about an hour, and our conversation was pretty much as he indicated. That he expressed his, just as in his testimony, he expressed his personal confidence in EML. He expressed his opinion that EML was a valuable resource. I gave him the situation, or I described to him the situation that we had with a laboratory that was costing the Department of Homeland Security millions of dollars, servicing a $400,000 program, as he described it, which took up, as I understand it, 1 full-time equivalent in EML. It was servicing some episodic measurements for the National Nuclear Security Administration, which took up a few staff hours several times a year. That's what we discussed. And I just put it to him. I said, it's costing us a lot of money. Your programs are being conducted under an agreement with the Department of Energy, not with Homeland Security. The Economy Act, in the event that something is done with this laboratory, the Economy Act would cause us to charge you a lot more than you're paying now, because there are no other DHS activities that are being supported. That was my half of the conversation.
And did he say, if you charge me more, we're not going to do it?
Yeah, he was astonished. He was astonished at the costs that I relayed to him from the laboratory. Now, he had no idea about what else was going on in the laboratory. So when I told him basically what's in my testimony, that we had not identified, work for this laboratory after 2006, and he recognized that this was reality. This is not my choice, not his. This is the Economy Act.
My time is up, and I do want to recognize Mr. Rothman, but a year ago I was in Hawaii on a congressional delegation from this committee to the South Pole, to Antarctica. But while we were in Hawaii on the way, we saw the device, the flotation device that will, I'm doing the same thing you were.
I'm sorry.
Catching. That will be was to be towed and positioned. It's a massive device with radar equipment and other sensing equipment to be towed and positioned in the Bering Sea to support our technology that has yet to succeed in intercepting a missile. And I don't know how much we're spending on that exactly, but I assume it's many billion. So the amount of money that you're talking about for this lab which would help us respond to a dirty bomb, would help us identify a dirty bomb before it detonated, would help us identify or had the potential, if we furthered their research, to identify if a ship was carrying a nuclear device, which strikes me as a much more likely threat to the United States than a missile from the soil of another country, that had the ability to tell us more about nuclear detonations in the region of the world where we are most worried about proliferation, that adjoins North Korea, India, Iran, Pakistan. It seems to me that no, this lab is not that expensive. Mr. Rothman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Clark, do you know how much the review and analysis of EML cost? This 18-month review?
How much it cost?
Yeah.
No, I really don't. It was some of my time. This is not my full-time activity. Some of Dr. Mandler's time.
You hired a firm called Booz Allen?
Mr. Hooks, our deputy director, had a contract with Booz Allen. It's our CETA contract for technical support. And he arranged to have a team of about 4 people, but they didn't work full-time on this.
Can we get that for the record?
Well,
I
don't have that information, but I'm sure it can be provided.
Can you provide it?
I cannot provide it. It wasn't my contract.
Okay. Doctor, you said that S&T was, I believe you were referring to S&T, was involved in an important national mission with limited resources.
Yes, sir. My personal view, but...
Yeah. Do you think it is being underfunded by the Congress?
Congressman, that is a policy question. It's way above my pay grade.
Do you have an opinion
on whether it's
underfunded?
Let me put it this way. I attend reviews of the programs that we have. I look at the yearly budget activities, and there are always projects that appear to be very, very worthwhile projects that fall above the funding level that the Directorate has. Now, they say that's a policy issue, not for me to decide.
Have you ever gone to your superiors and said there's a program that needs to be funded, and for whatever reason they've said we don't have the money for that?
No, sir. I have not had any programmatic responsibility while I was at Science and Technology Directorate. I offered management advice and analysis to my superiors when asked.
You do call those resources limited. I suppose it just you meant nothing by that?
Well, what I meant was what I just said, that I see in the budget process every year projects that look like they are worthy projects that have been requested by customers of the for the technology,
right.
Science and Technology Directorate, and they are not funded.
But
that's what I meant.
But it hasn't been under your jurisdiction
not my responsibility
to comment on their being not funded.
No, sir.
I think I followed the chronology in your written testimony and in the remarks that you made. If I've got it correct, at some point, new people came in and changed the decision that had been made with regards to EML. Is that a fair characterization, or how would you characterize it?
Actually, that's a very good question, and if I may just respond completely. I don't want to waste your time if you have others, but there seems to be a misunderstanding about the term closure. I tried to indicate before in my previous remarks that when we were using the word closure, we were using that with respect to an organizational entity with the title Environmental Measurements Laboratory, because frankly, even that title is not appropriate for this department.
I'm not asking about the closure.
Okay.
Whatever changes you were going to make with regards to EML,
mm-hmm.
apparently some or all of those decisions were revoked made null and void
I'm sorry,
by
that's-
new leadership? Can you comment on whether
Yes, I
that's
would.
true?
No, I would say not. If you look at the value proposition that we identified through all of our work in New York, and which is recorded in my testimony, and then you look at the decisions that will be discussed by Admiral Cohen and Mr. Oxford, you will see that there is a strong overlap. Now, what can I tell you? Supporting the test and evaluation that Mr. Duecker talked about was in there. That was part of our value proposition.
Excuse me, Doctor. I'm just referring to, if I may, Mr. Chairman, to a part of your written testimony. At several different places in your written testimony, you say that because an undersecretary or somebody retired or resigned, new people was coming in, that recommendations to the secretary were never acted upon.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
So is it fair to say then that those recommendations that you made have still not been acted upon?
Oh, that's correct, yeah. At least at the secretarial level. That's correct, yes.
They haven't been acted upon, period. They haven't been effectuated.
That's correct. But I thought, well, all right, go ahead.
Please go ahead.
No, I thought you were asking me, at least what I heard was that you said that the recommendations were revoked, and
okay.
the decision didn't go forward. What I was trying to emphasize
Right, they just haven't been effectuated. The 18 months
correct.
review and the recommendations have never been effectuated by DHS.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
A few more questions, Dr. Clark. One of the reasons that you have consistently given for the relatively low value assigned to EML is that it had little credibility among first responders in New York. We asked the police to send us someone to testify. They sent us Assistant or Deputy Commissioner Duecker. And the gist of this testimony was, we love those guys. I understand from our staff that they've talked to all the first responders, the police, the fire, the EMS in New York City and adjoining areas. And consistently they hear the same thing that Mr. Duecker said today, which was that they thought that EML's work was outstanding. It was the gold standard in radiation monitoring and detection and analysis. From whom did you hear that EML had a poor reputation, had little credibility among first responders?
From the people that we interviewed, from the FEMA director in New York, from the people in the Office of Emergency Management. Now, let's be clear. What Mr. Duecker was talking about was the work that was supervised by Adam Hutter in the Countermeasures test bed in doing the test and evaluation of radiation detectors, which he feels is so important for the city of New York. That work was never questioned. That work was never intended to be closed down. But that work was a very small part of what we're talking about here, which is the larger EML. The question the management issue that we had was, what do we do with this larger part of the EML which is not being employed, with no disrespect and a great deal of respect for the productive activities led by Dr. Hutter.
I'm sorry, did you talk to the first responders personally, or you kind of heard it through the grapevine?
No, I didn't talk to first responders. I mean, there are 40,000 police in New York, and no.
But you talked to the leadership of the first responders, the emergency response folks.
I talked to operational DHS elements in New York and the Office of Emergency Management, which has the job of coordinating all first response in New York. I did not talk directly to the police or the fire department.
Okay, and can you identify for our staff after this hearing the folks that you did talk to, and if you had corresponded by email, can we see the email exchange?
Well, I should have it. I gave you everything that I had in my computer.
Have we gotten that?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Rothman for another
Thank you.
question.
I have another meeting of a bunch of folks on another important matter, but Mr. Chairman, I thank you for allowing me to ask this question. Dr. Clark, do you have an opinion as to whether the as a consequence of the 18-month review, the work of EML was affected? Positively, negatively, no effects, hurt their operations, slowed them down, or not? And if so, could you share that with us, your opinion?
Well, actually, I was very pleased to hear Mr. Duecker's testimony in which he said that the contact and the support from EML to the New York Police had greatly accelerated over the last year and a half, and I believe that's in the record from his testimony. So, in the area in which the EML was making a positive contribution, namely the test and evaluation work led by Dr. Hutter, that work has improved according to
Well, he only was there for a year and a half, so he said for the year and a half he was there, they worked well together.
But I'm working from memory here, but we could look at what he said. I believe that's what I heard.
I think he's only been there a year and a half.
Well, that's, yeah.
But
Then he did say that it had accelerated over that period.
Over this last year and a half.
Which is what you asked me, whether as a result of our actions I could venture an opinion.
Well, when were the recommendations shelved or that you may not acted upon, if you'll understand what I mean? I can go back into your testimony if you don't remember.
I do.
You do?
Yeah. The first package we submitted was in December.
Yeah. Of what year?
Of 2005.
Right.
That was when Secretary McBrearty was still the Undersecretary. The planning for the transition of EML, we had to figure out how to preserve the valuable sections of the laboratory and what we should do about the people that... So all of this planning process went on into the spring.
So is it fair to say that your 18-month review concluded in December of 2005, or no?
I would say so, yes.
Okay. And that's about the time he got his job, Mr. Duecker.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, during the 18 months that preceded December 2005, do you have an opinion as to whether that review process affected EML during that time up to December 2005?
Yes. Now, this is a much narrow answer because it is with respect to the management of a small special purpose laboratory. In my view, it did improve it. When we began this review, there were a number of EML staff who were traveling around spending public money on behalf of in carrying out the roles that they had formerly been responsible for in the Department of Energy.
Mm.
That was stopped. And my own opinion as a management with a certain amount of experience in management is that this was good for the staff because it focused their attention on their new role in the Department of Homeland Security rather than their old role in. So
overall, would you say this 18-month review had a positive, negative, or neutral effect on EML?
Overall, I'd say taking account of the stress on the staff from the lack of decision, I would say that it was a terrible burden on the staff.
Mr. Chairman, if I'm allowed to come back by my staff, I'd like to ask that question of the next panel. If not, Mr. Chairman, if it's possible for somebody to ask that same question to the next panel. I appreciate your testimony, Doctor, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Rothman. Just a couple more questions, Dr. Clark. Dr. Fainberg testified here this morning that he fought to fund various projects at EML, the Global Radiation Monitoring Program, their rooftop radiation sensors, the QAP, and I think others. And he testified that he consistently advocated for that and and resigned out of frustration. And your testimony was today, your written testimony, is that there was no project manager who intended to fund EML beyond 2006. No S&T project manager who intended to fund EML beyond 2006 in any activity other than the Countermeasures testbed project. Now, Dr. Fainberg was a S&T project manager, isn't that right?
That's correct.
Is his testimony incorrect?
Well, in part. I believe he said that he was never asked, or he couldn't remember whether he was asked, and he certainly was. One of the first stops when Dr. Mandler and I were conducting the initial review of EML was to interview him, because he was funding most of the ongoing activities at the EML. And at that time, he gave us some very frank evaluations of the worth of the projects. Now, what he said in his testimony was that he felt they had some value. Well, as I testified, the competition for funding of worthwhile projects in science and technology is very fierce. And just because something has some value doesn't mean that it necessarily will be approved. Now, I personally did not make any decisions on the funding of any project at the EML. Those decisions were made by Dr. Jerry Parker.
Dr. Clark, I'm just struck by the fact that you and I seem to have heard different testimony just an hour or so ago. I didn't detect any ambivalence in Dr. Fainberg's testimony about the value of EML's programs. I detected in him great frustration, and that's certainly consistent with the email that he sent resigning, in which he said, John Clark is reaching into my program, preventing me from carrying it out under the guise of exercising his authority over EML. He has a clear aim of eliminating as much of EML's work for me as he could. It goes on and on. I'm sure you must have seen this email.
I've seen several emails, yeah.
Well, this is actually to Maureen McCarthy.
Yes, sir.
It does not show a CC to you. It does show to Dr. Parker and Robert Hooks and Carol Linder, but I assume that one way or the other.
Dr. Parker shared this with me after the fact.
Right. And so what he says in this email is not correct. Is that your testimony?
No, I am not challenging Dr. Fainberg's opinions. They are his opinions. His opinions were not accepted by Dr. Parker or Carolyn Purdy, for example. They were present at the final discussion that led to Dr. Fainberg's decision. I was not involved. I was not there. I was informed after the fact. So I'm not challenging his opinions, but they are his opinions.
Okay. It seems that that's a very different take, that he had opinions that you considered but rejected, rather than it sounded to me like you said a moment ago, that he candidly talked about the programs as of questionable value.
We're talking about a period of about 4 months, and what I just said about the initial interview between myself and Dr. Mandler and Tony Fainberg, and there was another person present, the contractor whose name escapes me. We had a very frank discussion about the value of these programs. The issue we're talking about now occurred 4 months later, and it was between Dr. Parker, Dr. Purdy, and apparently Dr. McCarthy. I had nothing to do with that.
Okay. Is it true that Dr. Fainberg wanted to continue funding and increase funding for the EML labs, for the EML programs? That he advocated for that?
Yes, as he mentioned a couple of specific projects. The neutron ship effect, which was in fact continued. It's still ongoing because they've never been able to finish it. Okay. He commented on if I remember correctly, and I'm just working from memory, he commented on the seminars that were held for the New York first responders. Those programs were continued and are continuing today. There was one just recently. can't remember what else he commented on specifically. So those programs that I recall that he was in favor of were in fact continued.
Dr. Clark, you said that it was, in addition to the lack of credibility that the lab had, it was simply a cost concern. And I certainly applaud every agency of government looking for ways to spend money and not feeling like they have to spend everything that they've got. But this is a lab that's total funding was $7 million. We heard elsewhere, yes. I think we've heard $10 million, but $7 to $10 million. You know, again, a good deal less than that contraption I saw in Hawaii that was on its way to the Bering Sea. Mm-hmm. And according to the S&T Directorate's budget information, in fiscal year 2005, there was $15 million at the end of the year in unobligated funds. In other words, money that had been appropriated, not spent. I applaud savings, frugality. In fiscal year 2006, $51 million in unobligated funds, or money that's appropriated but not spent. And on track now for fiscal year 2007 for $223 million in obligated funds, or money that's appropriated but not spent. Are those figures correct?
Sorry, that's above my pay grade. I had fiduciary responsibilities in one small area, okay, and that's what I was addressing. Well,
I have no further questions, but I encourage frugality in all of the federal government, but I'm sure that FEMA saved a lot of money in the time leading up to Katrina. In retrospect, that appears to be penny wise and pound foolish. And the money that the S&T Directorate saved on EML, I fear greatly, is going to appear at some point in the future to be penny wise and pound foolish if we are not ready to prevent and respond to a radiological attack. Thank you, Dr. Clark. And now we will take a 5-minute recess so everyone can stretch and refocus and attend to anything else that needs attending to, and we will reconvene shortly with the last panel. Subcommittee is reconvened. The hearing is in order again, and I will now call our third panel, Admiral J. M. Cohen, the Undersecretary for Science and Technology, Department of Homeland Security, and Mr. Dale Oxford. I'm sure you've had people pause over your name your entire life. Director of Domestic Nuclear Detection Office, Department of Homeland Security. And you all have been here for the other panels, so I'm sure you know that you have 5 minutes to present oral testimony. Your written testimony has already been placed in the record. After the committee has, after you've given your testimony, each member of the committee, which may be just me, will have 5 minutes to ask questions, or Mr. Rothman may be able to return. And we do place everyone under oath. Do either of you have any objection to taking oaths, to being sworn? And you're also entitled to counsel if you want it. Do you have counsel or do you wish counsel? And both of you are already raising your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Mr. Oxford.
Good afternoon, Chairman Miller. I would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to discuss how DNDO has worked with EML in the past and our plans for working with them in the future. I'm pleased to appear in front of you with my colleague, Undersecretary Cohen. EML has been an important partner for us and support us in 3 core areas: the Securing the Cities initiative that you've heard about, a testing series underway at the New York Container Terminal, as well as providing technical reachback within the Northeast region. They also perform a variety of other technical support efforts to include the Neutron Ship Effect program that we've heard about this morning. First, let me talk about Securing the Cities. DNDO established the Securing the Cities initiative to equip the New York region, state and local personnel with radiation detection capabilities and develop a defensive architecture for the protection of New York City. EML personnel, using their experiences with radiation detection systems and their relationship with the New York regional law enforcement agencies, are supporting these federal efforts. They provide subject matter expertise on detection system performance to the regional partners and participate in the development of concept of operations. Second, DNDO is currently testing its next generation systems called Advanced Spectroscopic Portals at the New York Container Terminal. The results of the testing at NYCT will help DNDO determine if these systems are ready for full rate production. EML provides the test director for this effort, oversees data quality management, and leads the multi-lab team to complete this test series. Third, to support the deployment of detection systems into the field, DNDO provides training, response protocols, and technical reachback capabilities to assist federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies and response personnel in resolving detector alarms. EML provides technical support to the deployments we have throughout the Northeast. Their spectroscopic expertise are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to provide technical support for alarm resolution. In conclusion, DNDO sees EML as an important partner in our development, test, and deployment activities and projects there will be an enduring need for EML into the foreseeable future. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your attention. I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. Thank you, Mr. Oxford. Admiral Cohen.
Chairman Miller, and it's a great honor always to appear before the Science and Technology Committee, and I wanted to let you know personally how much I appreciate the professionalism of the committee staff in this matter. Science and technology has and will change the world, and it holds the potential to make our nation safer. I grew up in the shadow of the EML building in Lower Manhattan and fully appreciate both its strategic location and its capabilities. I assumed my duties as Undersecretary for Science and Technology, Department of Homeland Security, on the 10th of August. You may remember that was the day of the London liquid explosives plot. Immediately thereafter, on the 11th of August, I established a rapid response team similar to what I had done in the Navy after the Cole and then after 9/11. The very first thing we did was to convene, and at that time we did not have a means to have a secure video teleconference, so we just had a conference call with all of my organic labs, including the Environmental Measurements Laboratory and all of the Department of Energy laboratories, which the enabling legislation so wisely allow me to leverage. I challenge them with their diverse backgrounds and talents, especially the DOE labs with world-class chemistry and physics capabilities to help us solve the problems associated with liquid explosives on the aircraft. Within 2 months, those efforts allowed Kip Hawley and TSA to establish the 3-1-1 rule, which is the 3 ounces in one bag per person, and get our aircraft back to some normalcy. Well, following that, in August, with the bipartisan support of the Congress and the administration, I immediately went about aligning my directorate for success, as I believe the enabling legislation wisely envisioned. I established what I call the 4 gets. I had to get the organization right, I had to get the people right, I had to get the books right, and I had to get the content right. And along with these, I established what I believe to be the principal threats, or as I call it, the 4 Bs: bombs, borders, bugs, and business, where business represents the underlying cyber that enables our whole society and our economy. The new organization was approved the first week of September 2006. The President's FY08 budget was realigned to the new 6-division customer output-focused model that I put in place. And in October, the Congress, in a bipartisan way, asked me to realign the FY07 Department of Homeland Security Appropriations Law to the new model. The status of my directorate at that time was clearly documented in FY07 legislation. The Transportation Security Lab's assignment to the Department of Homeland Security S&T versus TSA was in doubt. University centers of excellence were at risk, morale was low, and good people were leaving my directorate. Congress was on the verge of cutting my FY07 budget by $200 million. As I previously testified, Mr. Chairman, it took great courage, both sides of the aisle in an election year, to restore those monies, as you did, so late in the year, and I'm very appreciative of that. Over the last 8 months, we have, with the help of Secretary Chertoff and the Congress, largely achieved the 4 gets. Included in that, government service scientists and engineers who had left my directorate last fall asked to come back, and we welcomed them with open arms, and they're now part of my team. The final piece of that effort was bringing the full integration of both my organic DHS labs with National Department of Energy labs, as well as University Centers of Excellence, to provide the 2 pillars of basic research so important to our national safety. I have some charts, should you ask questions, that will allude to how we've done that. Finally, Vail Oxford and I are military and naval academy graduates who understand the meaning of leadership responsibility and accountability. For all my DHS S&T mandated missions, the buck stops with me. People are our most valuable asset. The nation is in crisis in science and technology. No one knows that better than the Science and Technology Committee, and I salute your efforts in the STEM and so many other initiative areas, and we want to be part of that. I regularly meet with and listen to all of my people. I have worked to make amends to them for any perception that they were not fully valued and appreciated at the Department of Homeland Security. I can assure you they are. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we can and will do better for the nation. I welcome your oversight and your questions, and I look forward to working with your committee and your staff. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Admiral Cohen. I do have a few questions for each of you. Mr. Oxford, we heard testimony this morning, mixed testimony on the skills, the strengths, the capabilities of the Environmental Measurements Laboratory. And obviously there were some people, at least within the S&T Directorate, who did not believe that the lab had any unique skills, did not have any qualities, that its programs could be easily replicated in other labs, and then others on the first panel this morning who took in my hearing, a very different point of view. What is your own assessment of the Environmental Measurements Laboratory?
We have, Mr. Chairman, found them to be very adaptable and responsive to the changing landscape. When I was first standing up DNDO, the view in S&T at the time was that the Countermeasures testbed would draw upon them to continue the efforts. We actually contemplated moving the Countermeasures testbed to DNDO because it had been predominantly a rad nuke related activity with EML providing some of the support. But the vision in S&T at the time was to broaden that into explosives and chemical support work within that region. So we chose to leave Countermeasures testbed within S&T and just leverage that. As we revisited the needs within DNDO, we realized we needed strong state and local partnerships and regional partnerships. And with the emergence of things like the test series, the Securing the Cities initiatives that I talked about, we recognized the presence of EML and the support they had already provided in the past was a very valuable activity. I'd heard some rumblings that there were studies underway within S&T to maybe change that landscape. I cautioned against that, even had a short discussion with the Secretary suggesting that this needed to be fully vetted before any action was taken. I later found that there was a briefing that was in preparation, I think you heard reference to it this morning, to make a recommendation from the Undersecretary at the time, Undersecretary McBrearty, to go to the Secretary to possibly make a recommendation to close the lab. Within that briefing, when I got a copy of it, it said that there had been no near-term requirements identified for the laboratory and specifically cited DNDO as one of those entities that had no near-term requirements. I'd not been personally consulted at the time, so that was when I wrote the letter to the acting undersecretary at the time, Jeff Runge, outlining what we thought our specific needs were, which equated to the time to between 9 and 12 people to provide the support to the 3 programs I mentioned in my opening statement. So we have found them to be more than competent in the changing landscape that we confront right now in the New York region.
And I know it sounds redundant, but they had skills, they had expertise that was important to your office and important to what you were doing.
Absolutely. I'm a big believer in bringing together the combination of technologists and operators. And by having people that had the trust of the New York City officials, as you heard from Assistant Commissioner Duecker this morning, to bridge that technical expertise. There are vendors in this world, as you probably know with the committee oversight that you have, that will sell almost anything to anybody, and the operators are particularly prone to that kind of marksmanship or marketing. EML helps provide the bridge between my office and the New York City officials who are deluged with these kind of marketing schemes to provide technical assistance on a daily basis to make sure that as we develop systems and they acquire systems, they get the right equipment. So it was very valuable.
Okay. And we've heard different testimony about how EML was regarded by first responders. I understand that your office works closely with the first responders, the first responder community, particularly in New York. Do you know, based on your own dealings with the first responder community, how EML is viewed by New York's first responders?
As you say, Mr. Chairman, we work very closely with the state and local community up there. I have developed personal relationships through the Securing the Cities relationship with the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey, Office of Emergency Management, the Fire Department, as well as regional partners in New York State, New Jersey State, as well as Connecticut. This is all under the umbrella of the Securing the Cities and the Police Commissioner. However, I can tell you that they call upon EML on a daily basis to provide the technical consultation that I've talked about, not only in the development of systems, but also in looking at a regional deployment architecture where detection systems may be the most efficient and effective, as well as to provide this technical support. If they ever do get alarms, how fast can we respond?
Thank you very much, Mr. Oxford, and I hope that under your leadership we can make the EML an asset to our national security and our homeland security. Admiral Cohen, thank you also for being here, and I know that we talked in the this morning about what has happened in the past with respect to EML and the problems, and I certainly hope that you can get things on track. You apparently share the view that things have gone off track with respect to EML, and that EML is of value to the nation's security and homeland security. Am I correct in taking your testimony today as a pledge to make the EML an asset, contributor to our response to the threats that we face?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. If I just may follow up a little bit on Mr. Oxford's testimony of the value of EML to New York and also to Homeland Security and the first responders in the tri-state area. When I was Chief of Naval Research, about a month after the tragic events of 9/11, I was asked by the Police Commissioner of New York to come up to his office, look at Ground Zero, which of course we did, and as Mr. Oxford has indicated, so many people offer so many solutions. Radiacs, and we saw this after 10 August, where I was inundated with handheld devices for liquid explosives. In the enabling legislation here at DHS, not only am I the executive for science and technology for the department, but you've given me 2 department-wide responsibilities in addition, which I value very much. One is the test and evaluation executive, setting the policy throughout the department, and the other is for standards, working alongside the National Institute of Standards and Technology. This is an area that was not widely exercised before my arrival as part of the realignment that we talked about, and we have that all in writing in what I call the STORM, the Science and Technology Organization Regulations Manual, so everyone knows what their responsibilities are, what the chain of command is. That for the liquid explosives, we asked people to come in. We sent them to Socorro, New Mexico shortly after 10 August. We actually did standardized testing, and no surprise, I think Mr. Oxford would agree with these statistics. We found about half didn't work, even though they looked very good on CNN, and the other half, some variation of those were easily spoofed, putting a liquid dye in a clear liquid. When the liquid was clear, they could determine what it was, but once you put a dye in it, they couldn't. And so about a month after 9/11, I was invited as Chief of Naval Research, and the Naval Research Laboratory right here in the Potomac reported to me at that time, to go to New York. The police commissioner takes me into a room, table about twice this size, and it is just full of handheld Radiac. These are radiation detection devices. And he said, Admiral, he said, and Mr. Chairman, you have to remember, at this point, the anthrax attacks are continuing. You don't know when the next shoe is going to fall. And so he says, we want to equip all of our squad cars with a Radiac. And he said, we don't know what to buy. Admiral, would you help me? And I said, absolutely. I said, if you'll just have a qualified patrolman, whoever you want, bring these to the Potomac Naval Research Lab, I will test them compared to what the manufacturer says they're going to do, and I will let you know. I will not, however, make recommendation. We did that for the New York City Police Department. So it's no surprise to me when I came into this new job, not having prior knowledge of EML, to know that we had a group there where when you look at the concentration of people, the efforts that DHS and other activities, government agencies are making, the high probability of the threat to the tri-state area, that this was a jewel that we needed to maintain, but as been testified to earlier, we needed to work with EML so that they could support both DNDO, and there's very important areas which I no longer, based on the FY07 legislation, have responsibility for nuclear radiological. All those reside with DNDO. And in my area, especially of test and evaluation, for many of the different sensors that we're bringing to bear, as Mr. Oxford indicated, we want to expand that not just from nuclear, but to include chem, bio, and explosives, which are my responsibility. So I am committed to it, sir, but it does take time to change the culture of a lab.
Admiral Cohen, unless you just especially want to show us your charts, I'm happy to excuse the two of you now.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. want to thank all the witnesses. I have to say I'm disappointed in the way the EML has been regarded in the last few years. I'm glad that I'm able to express disappointment rather than outrage as we piece together months after a radiological attack what might have been done different. And I hope that the errors that we have made to this point we can correct. And I appreciate the commitment by Mr. Oxford and Admiral Cohen to correct those errors. My able staff, the able staff of our committee, when they heard me talking about the contraption that I saw in Hawaii, through the wonders of the internet, were able to find out what the contraption was. And it is massive. Admiral, I don't have a chart for you. It's a heavy lift vessel, the Blue Marlin, with an onus deck, and that was where I saw it. I saw it on the Blue Marlin. The sea-based X-band radar, as it completed the photograph, as it completed the 1,600-mile journey from Corpus Christi, Texas, and then it would go on from there to the Bering Sea. According to Wikipedia, and so we assume that no one had gone on Wikipedia and changed the numbers. At that point, this one contraption alone had cost $900 million. That does not count the annual operating cost of the event. That is the radar to support a missile defense system that we've never made work. It seems to me that that it is very unlikely that our nation will be struck by nuclear weapon fired from a missile from the soil of another country. It is not unlikely because we will intercept it out of the air, that we will hit that bullet with a bullet. It is unlikely because the nation that fired the missile would cease to exist because of our retaliation. They say that if you owe a bank $20,000, you've got a problem. If you owe a bank $200 million, the bank's got a problem. It appears that if your program is $7 million a year and not many people have heard of it, it pretty much doesn't matter what it does, what its value is. That program is at risk. If you spend $7 billion on a program, almost despite the evidence that program is never going to do anything, it never goes away. I hope that we do go forward and recognize that this lab, although small, although before this hearing, and maybe even with this hearing, obscure, does play an important role in our ability to respond to the most likely threats we face, to prepare for, we hope, we pray, to prevent, and then to respond to the most likely threats we face. A dirty bomb, God forbid, a nuclear device not fired from the soil on a missile from the soil of another country, but in a freighter, smuggled into the United States in a truck, and that the neglect that we've shown to this lab in the next 3 years will not be something that we review again, wondering what if, whether these 3 years or 4 years of neglect would not have led to a different result. But thank all of you for being here. Thank you for this, for your testimony today.
Mr. Chairman, if I just may, what you see here is a picture of a meeting we had. I believe it's the first ever meeting on the 1st of May, just 2 days ago. These are all of the lab directors, principals only, of all of the DOE labs, as well as my organic labs. You can see Adam Hutter. He's standing just to the left of the fellow in the white shirt. Adam is the acting director of the EML. He, Transportation Security Lab, my NBAC, and my Plum Island labs were sitting at the table. 35 people, 35,000 people. They had the same vote, and we are now aligned, as we've aligned the Centers of Excellence, and we appreciate so much North Carolina's contribution to that,
Certainly.
so that we are supporting in the basic research area those critical initiatives to make the nation safer. So this meeting was scheduled long before we had knowledge of this hearing. It's the last piece of the puzzle in my alignment, and now it's up to me, working with Vail, to make it a reality. And we look forward to working with you, sir.
Thank you, Admiral Cohen, and I'm delighted for you that you were able to use the easels that you brought here this morning.